And so today in science, we have learned so much about paying attention, the art of it, the skill of it. We can develop it. And I want to make that clear to you that as I'm learning to write my memoir, it's about finding my voice in those words and letters that I'm writing, because it's the truth. And I want the reader to hear me and follow me and get sucked in and not leave me. All right, because if you miss a line and you come back later, what's the story about? You got to go back and read a few lines before that, or paragraphs. And so I just want to touch the science behind all this listening with your eyes. It's because of the revolution in what we are learning about neuroscience, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, pathways, where we can actually not just put a spotlight on what we are reading, but we can learn the skill of dampening the sound around us. Let me explain. So one of the important points that I'm mentioning is that about paying attention. I want the reader to pay attention when reading my memoir. And how do I do that? And so now studies have shown that this whole circuit of, paying attention is not just happening on what's called the cortex, but at the same time, there's also very much involvement of the deeper parts of the brain, all right, which is called the ancient brain. In particular, what's called the basal ganglia. So now we've got visual stimuli that come in through the eyes, what we see. There's auditory stimulus from what we hear, and these are all then relayed to what's called the area of the brain called the thalamus. Okay, but now we know, and studies by, for example, Michael Halassa from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, now we know that the thalamus is not just a relay station, but it's also like a gatekeeper. It can dampen down stimuli that's coming in and going out of it, and that affects how we pay attention to what we hear and how we pay attention to what we see. So when I'm talking about listening with our eyes, is that the stimuli that comes in from the visual stimulus gets up to the visual thalamus, and then this is then relayed on to the prefrontal cortex. But we now know with studies with Halassa that there is now a relay. It goes on to what's called the basal ganglia. And then from there it goes on to what's called the thalamic reticular nuclei, kind of a thin layer that envelopes the thalamus. So you can actually, this is an inhibitory, it inhibits the information that's coming in. And so it's a skill that we can learn, that we can dampen down the sound of the auditory input that's around us. You know how when we want to read, we want to go to a very quiet place, sit under a tree and read a book. But now by developing this skill, we can dampen down the stimuli that's reaching up to the prefrontal cortex. That goes to the basal ganglia. It inhibits this thalamic reticular nuclei of the auditory stimuli, dampen it down. And so we can start listening to the voice of the author in the book. And that's the skill that I'm trying to say. That when we are writing our memoirs, finding your voice in your writing, so that when the reader is reading, they get hooked onto you. They can hear your voice. And that's important in really enjoying the book. So there's so much that we have learned now by listening with our eyes, how we can develop the senses of really listening, hearing the voice of the author in the book. So that's the advance in neuroscience today. Michael Halassa and his team, we now know that these are deep-seated events and the neuronal connections that are happening deep in the ancient brain called the basal ganglia, and that the thalamus is not just a relay station, but it can also be a gatekeeper to dampen what's around us. And it makes interesting more real. It makes it more engaged. You get married with the author, and at the end of the day, it's a book well written and a book well read. So I'm learning this, that the skill of listening with your eyes. So as I read, I want to hear the voice. And very often, for example, I'm coming up with an interview with Kristen Iris and again with Brenda Smith. And these are people who have written the books. But when I hear them on YouTube and I hear their voice, and when I read their writing, I can literally hear them talking to me. And that's a whole new dimension to writing, and memoir writing in particular, because you're reading about the life of the person and how that impacts you. And hopefully, I hope that my memoir, as I write about it to you, will change your life as it did mine. And I hope that we can become closer to one another through this whole journey and pilgrimage to be better people.